Sure, bro. Hello and welcome to this week's Cyber Clinic. Today we're going to be talking about enumeration and privilege escalation in Linux and touching on it in Windows, along with welcoming some new students that have just started Cyber Clinic Semester 2, Week 1. We are also going to be covering a little bit on the NEBRC recruitment from Cosmin, as he has got a little bit more information on how that's progressing, and talk to you a little bit about what the NEBRC is.
Yeah. So the NEBRC is an organization set up by the police, I think.
Yep, in conjunction with the police.
Exactly. And what we're basically doing is cyber security assessments as well as educational materials for SMEs. So we're doing what you're learning at Cyber Clinic, but we're also teaching other people who do not have the technical knowledge to understand everything like terminal and all this hacky stuff, as well as conducting actual cybersecurity assessments.
Yeah, so all of these positions with the NEBRC are paid positions. You become a consultant for them, and you will, if you are successful in getting onto the course, which is the recruitment side of it, there is additional workplace opportunities for you. We had a meeting with them this morning, and I believe it's still progressing, and Cosmo's just going to update you on the actual...
Yeah, so Martin told us to let you all know that recruitment isn't finished yet. They still have your applications and they have some people on the short list, but there are some delays because we have some projects going on in the background. We have some contracts that we have to finish soon, and they have to push back the recruitment vetting, I think is the term.
Yep.
Yeah, so they had to postpone recruitment, but if you didn't get an email from them, that doesn't mean you are not you haven't been selected. They haven't gotten around to anyone's applications yet, so don't feel bad. Recruitment is still on. I do not know if you can still send your application, but I do not.
We don't believe so. But
we don't believe so. So yeah, that was it. If you didn't get a response yet, and I'm pretty sure no one did, you'll have to wait a little bit longer. Sorry for that. We have a lot going on right now at the center. There is a lot of
interesting stuff going on.
Yeah, we have the LEP thing, which I think is also on the website. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so
thank you very much for that, for the update.
No problem.
So our normal disclaimer applies now that we're actually going to be getting into a little bit of the content of the video. So this is only for educational purposes. Please do not use anything that you potentially learn in any of these videos to go out and conduct malicious attacks anywhere. This is only for your education and furthering your cybersecurity career. So first of all, I want to welcome all of the new people that are here. We have a YouTube channel, which you are currently watching, that has quite a lot of videos on it already. Next slide, Ryan. Right, thank you. Yeah, so we have a YouTube channel that's up here already. There's a lot of content from last semester about how to install Linux, what some basic attacks are, where we go to learn how to hack and do all of these kinds of things. And we also have a Discord channel. So our Discord channel is sort of like where we're going to be proceeding for the second half of this. We will be conducting a second hour-long talk starting at 4 over there about the cybersecurity news that happened this week, including some incredible sort of breaches and sudo vulnerabilities that have been around for 11 years on basically every PC or Linux machine that has existed. So going into it, we're going to be talking a little bit about enumeration this week. So we touch on enumeration quite a bit in the last couple of weeks when you've been watching people like Cosmin's live hack demos or CTF walkthroughs and some of the stuff that Ryan's been doing. Those are part of those scripts that we run are enumeration scripts. So we're just going to sort of like more have a discussion about when you use them, why we use them, and all of those things that are sort of like in that space of privilege escalation. So enumeration currently is a way to elevate your own prems or your own sort of like privileges within a system. So if you think about it, if you have your average low-level user, you want to be able to get a little bit more. So you want to be able to run a command. You want to be able to browse a file tree. You want to be able to install a program. You need elevated user perms, and these enumeration scripts are ways to help you look in the right places for these kinds of scripts.
Yeah.
So on Linux,
on the so they'll find all the weird bits of the system that like might be exploitable. Most scripts won't like do it for you. They'll just go, hey, yeah, there might be something over here or over there or whatever.
Yeah, there are a lot of whatchamacall them vectors. So let's call them vectors. Some of them are obvious, others not so much. For example, some applications have the permission to. This is just an example. Matt will get into this in a second. Some applications can run other applications as root, and only root can set those privileges. And if the administrator has set those privileges for that application, and if it can be executed by someone else, for example, it has the access flags set for executable for everyone, well, that means you can run or you can trick that application into running whatever you want.
Exactly. So some of these CTF stuff that we are having to do when we are trying to learn to hack and everything like that, we will have to let's say, run a reverse shell, for instance. Just ignore what Ryan's doing. We're just currently opening a virtual machine to show you some of the stuff. Yes, we can.
You can, but not through the stream.
Can we? Well, I can. Through the stream, I can.
Oh, through this. Oh, I'm watching the wrong stream. Too many streams. Sorry about that. But yes, so we're going to be opening up a virtual machine so that we can show you what WinPEAS is in action. So WinPEAS is a script for enumeration. WinPEAS is probably first then. I've forgotten what order the slides are in. Sorry, my brain's a bit of a mess this week. Yeah. I really apologize. This isn't how our talks normally go. But WinPEAS is a local Windows privilege escalation script. You can go out and run it on your own machines. It is, I'm not going to say completely safe, touch wood, but all of that stuff. But I was running it on my own machine over the weekend and a couple of days ago, and it was allowing me to demonstrate where my weaknesses were in my own system so that I could go away and further increase my own security. So WinPEAS and LinPEAS are developed by the same person. They are incredibly broad and in-depth packages. The LinPEAS one is sitting at about 3,000 lines of bash scripts, and it will automatically go through and pick out a load of information. So if we go to the next slide, we can start to see some of the information that it's picked up and why it's important. So here, just WinPEAS as a basic script will be able to go out and get all of your system information. And we're going to talk a little bit about why this is important, because if you know that, let's say, outdated versions are the biggest way that we can find exploits, you can start to see if actually the operating system has any exploits, what hot fixes, what patches, what all of these small little things are installed on the system. And these can be incredibly important for trying to go out and find a exploit. So
yeah,
Windows.
Often,
I'll continue, Cosmin.
So often, if there is a well-known exploit or an older one or a big one, like the one with sudo we've discussed about last week, usually there is some sort of script or proof of concept, which is usually also a script or some piece of software that exploits that and pops you into a shell easily. You just run it and it all does the magic for you if it's a very well-known vulnerability. And these scripts like WinPEAS and LinPEAS are actually very good at it.
They're all about pointing you in the right direction that you can go away and have a look. So for my version of Windows, I don't believe there's any full proof of concept builds, but if you run this on a 2012 box or a Windows 7 box, It'll point you in the right direction to be able to go out to what your favorite DB exploit DB, sorry, and there's a couple of others out there that have all of your proof of concept codes on them, and you'll be able just to copy and paste them and see if you can actually get them to run. It also allows you to see drive permissions and map drives, shared drives, where else this machine is looking at.
A good way of finding some of these things is if you get like a CVE number, if you just stick that into Google with GitHub at the end, there's a lot of proof of concept for various CVEs on GitHub. And I mean that means they're all open source, so you can just look through all the code, which is brilliant. So you learn a lot, and you're able to progress in the CTF or on the job or whatever you do.
Yeah, and ExploitDB also has a filter for CVEs and version or types of exploits and things like that.
It's incredibly important when you're looking at your CVEs and reading these proof of concept scripts that they're actually doing the stuff that they say they're doing. Can't remember what I was doing. I was doing some CTF probably 6 months ago, and I read through the proof of concept build, and it was just one off of GitHub. It wasn't a recognized one. And as you read through the code, it started to do weird things like pop open an additional terminal that had no real use. And then later it started additionally writing files or doing things that it really shouldn't be doing to be able to get a reverse shell onto your own machine from an external hacker. So you've just got to be careful when you are running some of these things. And just quite iffy. So always read through the code and make sure that it does actually do what you think it might do. And this is where you start to learn to become more of a hacker than a script key. Can I have the next one, please? So WinPEAS is really good for searching and sort of like indexing your file structure. So for me, I have about 10 or 15, well, probably I think it's 12 terabytes in this machine that I ran this on. And it took 25, 30 minutes to run through them all. And it ended up getting a bunch of actually sensitive files that I'd kind of forgotten about. Because I've got so much storage, it was finding old history files or my VPN configurations that from a while ago and RSA keys, all of these interesting files that you think, okay, I've got a copy of them in this place, but you might have extra copies lying around. And these interesting files are quite useful because sort of like 3/4 of the way down there, you can see id.rsa, and that is a sort of like a key that is used for SSH logins. Yeah, thank you, Ryan. Yeah, so these SSH logins are what allow you to make your server more secure. We talked about this right at the tail end of last semester. And having access to one of these keys means that you could potentially bypass a large amount of the security that was put in that box in the first place and made it secure.
Yeah, just a note, you'll see on the screen idrsa.pub. That means it's the public key and it will not help you. The good keys, the ones that you actually want if you're doing an engagement, are ID, RSA, and that's it. Those are the private keys. If they have .pub at the end, means they are public and they're pretty much worthless.
I mean, it's probably always good to check as well, because I mean, people might rename them .pub even if they're not, just to sort of hide them.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So all my private keys go into a password manager, and I only leave the public keys lying around for this exact reason. Of if someone manages surprisingly to get on my system, then hopefully they don't know my password to my password manager, and they can only find public keys. But you can also see it's got VPN configurators, error logs that are incredibly useful. It will check bash history or command prompt history for passwords. And you'd be surprised how many times you go into a system and you look at the history of bash commands and someone has typed the password in because they thought they were doing sudo some command and then by default started typing their password in. And by accident, they've misspelt sudo or the command, and they just type their password in plain text on the command line and never clear it. It happens in a lot of CTFs.
I literally did that yesterday and had to go purge my history.
Yep. So all of us do it, and it can be an incredibly, I'll say, rewarding experience just to check bash history. Next one, please. So moving on to sort of like the more well-known one, the one that you're going to be using more and more is going to be. I think the stream's lagging a little bit, Ryan. XDN is asking.
Yeah.
Yeah, quite a few drop frames.
It's because I've got a VM running in the background. It's not too happy, but
yeah, it's not the end of the world. But anyway, LinPEAS is your Linux enumeration script. So when you're doing a lot of CTFs, it is incredibly rare to find a CTF that you are going to be running against a Windows box. 95% of them are some version of Ubuntu or a Debian. And LinPEAS, again, developed by the same guy, can get a lot of the same information, but it's a lot more refined. The LinPEAS version has been in development for years and years and years, and the Windows version is still on version 1. So there is quite a big difference between the two. So some of the best information that you're going to get right off the start, the first thing that you do when you run your sort of LinPEAS script is you're going to get what compilers are installed on the system. So here we can see GCC's installed. GCC is the C++ or a C compiler. So it means that if you have any raw malware or raw privilege escalation scripts, again, only for educational purposes or for these CTF boxes, you can run these on these boxes and compile them locally on the machine.
1 second. Some people are saying that the stream started to lag. Patrick asks, is this recorded because the stream won't load? Also, I won't be able to hear your response.
I believe that it's fine. It's going to record fine because we are streaming. But if it's streaming and lagging on one, it might lag on both. We're just sorry. We'll have a.
Yeah, give me a minute to poke at things.
I think they may have to click the live button because it keeps going. It keeps hanging behind.
Shouldn't be too much affecting it.
Okay, so it sounds fine right now. Right, so I don't know how much of that you last got, but I was just on about LinPEAS is, let's say, incredibly good at trying to pick out information that allows us to write or code or implement our own malware. Again, for educational purposes. So here we're just looking at GCC compiler, which is the C compiler. So it means if we've got any raw malware that we can put on a system, we can manually type it in, we can copy and paste it, we can compile it on their system so that it doesn't look like they're downloading dodgy things off the internet. We can compile them all locally and run them locally. Next slide, please. Thank you. Yep, so architecture, another quite good one. My stream is still lagging a little bit.
You can use the Discord one. Oh, that might be causing the lag, actually. Big brain.
We think we're troubleshooting things, but yes.
Yeah, I'll probably fix the issue.
We think we're troubleshooting.
We think we're troubleshooting. Again, sorry, this isn't as much as our normal one, but here we have another screenshot showing some quite important information, whether it's 32, 64-bit, because we know that you can't run all malware on 64-bit computers. Some of it has to run on 32, some of it has to run on 64, and it allows you to interpret and allow you to cherry pick what you're going to be running slightly more interestingly and more carefully. Here we can see that it's a VM because it's running KVM. So we can see that there are ways for us to troubleshoot down malware and, again, privilege escalation stuff. There's not too much more information on this slide, but again, there is a lot of information about just the system. Yeah. Everything you know more about the system allows you to cherry pick and do things a little bit differently.
One thing good to note is the byte order. So if you're crafting like a buffer overflow payload or something like that, or you'll probably need to know the byte order in order to craft the payload successfully. Otherwise, you'll get a payload that you'll try and run, and it just won't work on the target system because it's it's a big endian system instead of a little endian system.
Yeah. So what Ryan says here, for those that don't know what byte order is, Intel and AMD sort data in the memory differently. So AMD puts it in the memory as is, while Intel puts it in reverse for some reason which I couldn't decipher to date. But so if they are put in reverse, so they're writing it end at the beginning and the beginning at the end of the stream in memory, that is called little endian. So is the reverse one. The more logical one, the one that is written as is big endian, and it's usually used by AMD. I'm not sure about ARM. I do have to check on that, and I'll get back to you in a few minutes. But Intel user has used little endian since its inception, and AMD uses big endian. Cool.
Perfect. That's something that I hadn't even thought of. So there we go. I've learned something today. I don't think there's any more information on this slide. Can we have the next one, please, Ryan?
Already jumped over.
Can I add one more
yeah.
thing to the previous slide?
Jump in, I.
Some CPUs are also vulnerable to Spectre and Meltdown, so you may use that information that was on the previous slide regarding the CPU stuff. Say, for example, this is an Intel Xeon. I'm not sure. I don't think this one is vulnerable, but some of the Intel ones, I think 4th gen is definitely.
Vulnerable. Anything before 2008 or 2010, I believe, is still currently vulnerable unless you patched your BIOS.
I'm not entirely sure. Okay, yeah, we'll have to check that as well. I'll look it up while you guys do your thing here.
Yeah. So all of if you don't know what Spectre and Meltdown were, they were a BIOS flaw or a flaw inbuilt into many CPUs that allowed you to read. I think it was plain passwords from memory. Please correct me if I get that wrong, but yeah, reading straight passwords and everything from the memory of the computer. So you useful software, it will also go through and detect them for you as well. Useful software on this stuff, again, we're seeing GCC, we're seeing Make, we're seeing Python, we're seeing Perl, we've got PHP. All of these things allow us to work out whether or not we can install additional, what kind of malware we can use. So Python is your go-to scripting language 95% of the time if you're writing something for an exploit or something live that you want to do on the system to iterate over something to brute force on the actual box. Most of the time, if you're wanting to get a reverse shell out, you're going to want to use something like PHP or ICMP, which are sort of PHP is a programming language that is designed for websites. ICMP is a way to obfuscate that kind of outsourced tunnel. Again, we've got Make GCC, so you can even encode all of your own packages directly onto the system.
One thing to note on here, Docker is an interesting one to list in there. Because Docker, if people don't know, it's a way of running things they call containers. They're like really small VMs for doing one specific thing. So you'd have a Docker container for running a web server, for instance. But the good things, well, I said the good things. The good things from our point of view about Docker is you can, if you're not root on a system, but you can start a brand new Docker container where you can mount the root of the drive to a virtual file path within the container, and then also connect to that container as the root user, so you're then inside the container as root, but because the host file system, so your normal machine's file system, is mounted inside the container, you can then access all of it as a root user. So you can privilege escalate that way. It's quite an interesting one. Yeah.
And it basically doing it that way means that it doesn't matter how many fancy blocks most of the time they've got on the system, just mounting the file system and logging it as your own root user within a Docker container or even your local machine allows you to bypass so much of the stuff that they've managed to put in place and allows you to gain root access a little bit easier. It also searches for all of your outdated versions. So again, incredibly useful for us, so that we can find malware, we can find privilege escalation scripts, we can find whatever we need, and be able to go off and start our Google searching for a lot of exploits, which is quite nice. Again, Docker here is unpatched, so it almost wants you to leave you to the idea of go down the Docker route, because that seems like fun. So again, we're looking for authorized keys. Authorized keys, passwords. This is quite a large and important part of us. It's also searched the bash history. It's not found anything because I did clear the bash history beforehand, because I'd done the same thing as tried to type command, instinctively put my password in. There was nothing else there. So I had just cleared it. But here we're finding authorized SSH keys. We're finding a bunch of password files. We're searching for everything that, if we can think of it, this script has probably already done it. Cosmin has just managed to put in Intel and AMD CPUs for Spectre and Meltdown, which are vulnerable to those kinds of attacks. So even CPUs as late as 2017 can be vulnerable to these kinds of attacks. And I'm just scrolling down the list, and yep, mine's there. Okay.
Can we get F's in the chat for Matt's CPU, please?
I know. F's. But yeah, so these kinds of searches are incredibly, incredibly useful. Again, just for even pointing you in the right direction. Next slide, please. So how do we transfer the script to a box? Because most of the time, they're not going to come pre-installed with these privilege escalation scripts unless you are very, very lucky and you end up logging into some pen tester's box, or someone has already got there before you. If you are in a CTF where you are competing against other people in real time, the amount of times that you are going to come onto a box and it already has LinPEAS or WinPEAS sat there is remarkably, remarkably low. So how do we actually get it to the box? So you saw last week when Cosmin was going through his CTF that he opened an Apache server, and you managed to open a web connection and pull the scripts using wget off of your host machine. You could do that the same with Python, any kind of web server. It doesn't have to be local. If it can reach out and touch the internet, you can reach out and touch an internet site. But downloading is probably going to be your main way of getting scripts onto boxes.
Yeah.
There are other ways,
Yeah.
but that's on primary.
Just a note on the like downloading a file onto a box. wget's a great tool for it, but it's not always available. But you can use curl to actually do the same sort of. You can effectively do the same request. You just need an extra couple of command line arguments to actually save that output to a file. So if you don't have wget, you can fall back on curl, which is pretty much installed and everything. I've yet to find a box it's not installed on, so.
Yep, it's the same thing as Nano. Every time that I will try and edit a file, I'll use Nano, but occasionally, for some reason, it isn't installed. So then you have to revert back to Vim, which isn't, or VI, which is installed on literally everything. So there are these things.
That is if you do have an interactive shell. If you don't, good luck.
Yeah. Time to pray. But yeah, so downloading, you can come into a whole host of problems with downloading. Most of the time, the problems are the boxes that we're trying to get into can't talk to the internet. You have to VPN into their private network and then play with them from there. So think of all of your hack the box ones. You'll have to VPN in and then mitigate it from there. So how do we get them on from somewhere that can't touch the internet? Sometimes you can pull directly from a IP because they just have disabled DNS servers or blacklisted the DNS saying, you're not allowed to go to GitHub anymore. Okay, I'll just put in the IP of GitHub or put it on a Dropbox somewhere on the cloud, something like a paste site.
Yeah, a note on like using GitHub and stuff. If they have just like you can't use DNS, but you want to pull a script from GitHub still, if you pull the IP for GitHub by doing an NS lookup or a ping or however you want to do it, and then you can use this resolve argument in curl, which you can effectively, while you're running that command, you can manually map certain host names to certain IPs. So even though you don't have DNS, you can effectively simulate DNS within curl. So you can get around those sorts of restrictions, which is quite handy.
Incredibly so. And if they have, let's say, stopped you being able to pull from any kind of URL or IP, that's going to be a slightly more interesting issue. If you want, you can manually write out all the lines by hand, but that's if you don't have an interactive session or an interactive shell. If you have an interactive session or shell, you might be able just to legitimately pull it from copy and paste. So just right-click into a empty file on the host system and write out all the files and all of the commands, and that can be an incredibly useful way of doing it. If not, you've got opening a local web server.
Yeah,
And
or
that's-
you can use SCP as well if you have SSH access using, for example, a key or whatever.
Yep. The only problem with SCP is an amazing tool for putting stuff on boxes, but I have to admit I very rarely used it, and that's to my own detriment.
Yeah, and it's tedious. Quite frankly, I find Apache to be the best option because, for example, on Hack the Box, most most boxes don't have DNS access. So if you do put in, for example, a GitHub link, you will not be able to download any script. So you have to download one locally, host the Apache server, copy your script to var .html, and wget from your IP address / script name, or however your Apache server is structured.
And that's what we saw last week from Cosmin do as he got WinPEAS onto the box in the first place.
Hey.
Yep. It is the most effective way and will work either probably 60 to 70% of the time plus. If not, then you've always got Python simple HTTP and Ryan's favorite tool in the world.
PwnCat.
Yep.
Yeah, we'll cover that. We'll cover that in a bit.
We'll do another talk and in-depth dive into PwnCat in probably a later week.
I don't know. We might be able to squeeze a little quick bit of it in today. I don't know. We'll see how time goes. But if not, we'll definitely cover it at some point this semester.
I tried using it. I have no idea how to use it. None.
It's good. It's good shit. Anyway.
Yep. So, as I was saying, if we can't download it, we'll have to find another way. I think that's the wrong slide.
Was the next one on the list?
Um,
I did question it, but I was like, you know what? Matt seems to know what he's doing.
Not today, apparently. Not today.
So if you don't have DNS, you can use curl or wget. With curl, you have to output the standard output, so with a greater sign. Yeah, with a greater sign to the name of the file. That's the main difference.
I think you can use taco as well.
Or that, yeah.
So, for what we're going to be going to do now is we're actually just going to be live streaming a live demo and talking through some of the results that WinPEAS manages to get us. We're going to be running this on our local Kali machine. Ryan's going to be running it on his local Kali machine. And we're going to be talking through and talking about some of the interesting results that it will hopefully pick up. I'm not going to say that it will, but I'm hoping it'll pick it up.
Hopefully.
So, as I say, we are just going to stay here. If you've got more questions, please keep asking them. Whilst we pull up the...
Yeah, I'm just getting things ready.
Kali. Yep. Pulling down the script and stuff, so...
I'll do that on the stream.
Yeah.
Just a quick question. How does everyone find this session, this discussion style format?
We are trying something new, so if it is not as good as our pre-recorded videos and stuff like that, we can go back to those next week. But we also wanted to get a little bit more information and questions and stuff in. So if you have got any kind of criticism or feedback or...
I know some.
Right, there we go.
Okay.
Hopefully we can see that now.
I mean, if you don't understand something, please just
Jump in the Discord for the second hour. We are there for the full hour. We
Yeah,
answer
you
as
can
many
ask in
questions as
chat.
possible. But
So yeah, I've already copied
Oh.
the. Oh,
Paul
no,
Vickers
no.
likes it. Okay, we got the seal of approval.
yeah, there we go. We don't ever need to go back to the old way.
Yeah, so
That's
if
it.
you want to pull LinPEAS up, you can just Google it.
I'll just set
I'm
up
just
a poll
copying
on
the
straw
URL.
poll, as I see that some people don't really
Go.
create a poll.
Actually, I'll pull it down.
So here all we're doing was we're just on our standard terminal. This is an interactive terminal, which means that we have the ability to copy, paste, do all of the fun things. So what Ryan's currently doing is pulling down the script and setting it so that it is able to be executed, which means that he can run it as a command. So the chmod +X, can you just control mouse wheel?
Yeah, but I was gonna increase my line height, my line count, history size, inline, unlimited.
So
Do that.
LinPEAS will produce a huge amount of information, and it will, if you are running a default terminal, completely blitz it and explode it and make it completely unusable because it will cut off a load of information.
Yeah.
So
So
what he's doing at the moment, I'll let you see
I've
it.
just entered my line count to unlimited. So the idea is that it won't ever cut anything off at the top. It'll just probably keep eating RAM until it runs out, I guess. I don't know. But usually it's not an issue because it's set at 1,000 lines, which is normally enough for what you're doing. But LinPEAS just blitzes through that, like Matt said, and yeah, you end up hitting like 2,000 lines, like so you lose
No,
half your
more
output.
than that.
Yeah.
So just for that particular session, set it to unlimited and
So
hope for the best.
start the script now, and we'll see how long it
So
takes.
what we've done is modified the script so that we can execute it using chmod, and then we've run it with the tac-a command. So tac-a, if you want to explain what that does.
So that effectively tells LinPEAS to do all the things, because by default it only does a subsection of what it's capable of. But the tac-a effectively says, "Hey LinPEAS, check everything you know how to check." It's more noisy, so it's more likely to show up in logs and stuff. But this is our own system. We don't care if we get caught, because I mean, no one's gonna catch us because it's your own box.
We are using it for educational purposes. If you were doing it on a CTF box as well, the chances are you won't need to do a -a, because otherwise you are going to be sifting through thousands of pages of information. Whereas here on our local system, we want to get as much information onto the system as possible.
So someone is asking what is chmod. Chmod changes who has access to that particular file and what they can do with it. So there are three main access, let's call them lists, access lists. You have the user that owns the file. You have the group that owns the file, which are both changeable. And you have
Everyone.
yeah, everyone
Yeah,
else.
everyone else.
So you have special access control for everyone else that is not part of the group or is not that particular user. And with chmod, you can set whether either of these three can read, write, or execute that particular file. Usually, these files depends on how important the file is. But for example, sudo will only be accessible by the people in the sudoers group. Maybe the root flag will only be accessible by root and not even anyone else in the group. Maybe you have very just regular stuff like ls or actually chmod that you mentioned. That is an application too that is accessible by everyone, so it is executable. You can also set whether those applications can change their user they are running as, but that is for another time with setuid and setguid. So that is what chmod does. If you ever ran ls tac la, you would have seen something like this.
Yeah, I've got it
Yep.
up on
So
screen.
we've just pulled it up on the screen now for an ls TACL, which allows you to sort of like look at the read-write permissions.
Yeah, so to explain them, the first three here are the owner permissions, then you have the group permissions, and then you have everyone else, which are the last three. And then continuing that, the first Ryan in this case is the user, and then the second one is the group. Correct. I think that's the right way around for those two.
Yep, it is. At least I think it is as well.
Yeah.
But when we are looking at these RWXs, what it means is read, write, execute, and these can
Yes.
also hold a numerical value. So most of the time, if something on your system is not playing right, you can chmod it and just say 777 or whatever the user is, which would be 700, and that allows you to run everything on it if it is a dodgy file. And like all of a sudden you are able to access and manipulate the file, and you can check if it was file permissions or whether it wasn't. And if it isn't, you can change it back to what it originally was.
Yeah. So can you guys explain quickly how? So if you haven't, because I've been reading the chat. Sorry, how to read that RWX thing and Ryan, what they all mean.
Yeah, I did that. Yeah, I think we
Okay,
went over
sorry.
that. Yeah, it's alright. We're good to go back to the WinPEAS
Yep.
output. Right, so this is probably run, yeah, as you can see, my scroll bar's got a bit smaller over here now. But we've got plenty of output. Yeah, so the first thing it does is print its lovely little, P. And then it explains, only use it for pen testing and educational stuff, which is fine.
We also highly organize and recommend everything that you are going to be doing is for educational purposes only.
Yes. Or get explicit permission from whoever's box you're doing it on.
Yep.
Yeah, so first of all, it goes over its legend, which is, how it highlights certain things. Yeah, how it highlights certain things in this output so you can find certain bits easier than others. So in this case, first off, we see pseudo is red and yellow, which 95% PE vector. Effectively, that's saying, we can get privilege escalation using that, pretty much guaranteed. I guess I'm explaining through this. It's going to be fun.
Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it then just goes down your color tier list,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
the less red it is, the less likely you are to be able to get privilege or the root access.
Yep.
Is what privilege we are trying to get to at all times.
Yeah, when I'm going through, if I've just run this on the CTF box, I usually skim through it and just look for red bits. If there isn't any red bits like that are of note, I'll go over and look at it a bit closer. But a lot of the time in CTF box, you can just skim through it. Oh, look, there's a red bit. Yeah, that's probably your vector to escalate.
So looking down this list here, we are starting to look at some writable folders. So we can see that we've got Nmap installed, we've got Netcat installed. We can start to see that we've got a few fun tools. We can see that it is a Linux version, Debian. It's got a compiler built into it. Again, so we can look at privilege escalation or C scripts.
Yeah, so I think this is the vulnerable pseudo version as well, which is flagged up. It doesn't know that probably because they haven't added it to the repo, but it's yeah, I don't think there's any public exploits for it yet either. But
No, I tried playing
there's
with
a
it,
proof
but
of concept to see whether it is or isn't vulnerable.
Oh,
yes,
okay.
I sent it to Cosmin this morning. He was
yeah, that's for Mac, I think, but I can send you. Actually, you can type in this. Wait, let me type it into chat.
Yeah, stick it in chat and I'll have a poke at it later.
Yeah. So the pseudo vulnerability also affects Mac devices, which is quite a big thing. Because we thought it was just Linux servers. Nope, it's basically half the ecosystem in the world.
So yeah, after initial bit of brief system info, it'll check the path, see if it can modify the path, and interesting values on that. So you can see that certain I have go bin and local bin in the system path, or in the user's path anyway, which can be used to sometimes replace binaries that are run by cron jobs and things like that. So instead of it running what it wants to run, if your element in the path is further to the left in the list, then it'll run the binaries out of that folder before its proper ones. So if it's running, I don't know, I can't think of a good binary name, but I don't know, hello as a binary name, and it's meant to be out of some, like, let's say in this case, the sbin folder, and we have a hello binary in my go bin, then it'll find the one in go bin before sbin, which in that case we can then get, whatever account the cron job's running out as, which is probably root, to run our binary, which could give us privilege escalation. That's why that's highlighted in red. And then it's going to go on to mention, system stats, which would be like file system usage and that sort of stuff. It's usually not too useful, but I mean, it'll list like mount points and stuff. So if you go back to when I was on about, when I mentioned Docker, if for whatever reason this is running inside a Docker container and there's a mount point here that suggests it could be to the host file system, might be worth looking into.
It's also a good thing to check if you have any shares mounted, such as file serve shares, or if you're in a company and you are doing a legitimate pen test, if they have shares that are, let's say, going to their financing system or going to a domain controller, or of these, it won't be a domain controller on Linux, but like of these other nicer, more privileged files.
Yeah, I've got one there for that I have between pretty much all my VMs, just a dump folder. I don't even know what's in it, but it's useful if I need to get files over to my from my host system. But yeah, they'd look like that. So they look like pretty normal in this path, but you'll see like the path might be weird instead of slash.
Media, it'll be a slash an IP address or a host name or something like that.
Something odd, yeah. And then this is the output of. In fact, this actually checks for. It's cut off the bottom of the screenshot in the PowerPoint, but this is what Matt was going on about in the PowerPoint. How it's got the byte order and the architecture and stuff. But by the looks of it, at the bottom it does check for Meltdown Inspector. So. Yeah, so we pretty much ran over that. Unless you guys want to add anything.
Keep scrolling down. I don't think there's anything else to add on that stuff.
And then
there's loads of information.
The next chunk's your environment, which are all just environment variables. A lot of these will be, there's not much to them. And then, I mean, some of these are flagged in colors, but
you've got one red thing.
Yeah, one red thing, and it's empty.
Yep.
But it might be worth looking into. I don't actually know what that's for. Something to do with less, which is you can read text files and stuff. Yeah, I mean, some of these might be useful, but a lot of the case
again, most of the time that you are going through this on a CTF or something, if anything's in anything less than red, you just scan over it.
Yep. So yeah, the next section here, it's checking for, a certain abilities enabled and extra bits like SE Linux, which will secure, as I understand it, effectively helps you lock down your system by securing what binaries can do what. And it's like on by default and it's a pain to get around, but it'll check whether you're inside a virtual machine. So this is obviously, running Oracle VirtualBox, or sometimes it'll show VMware in there, Hyper-V, that sort of thing.
By the way, remember when we said that big ending is for AMD, actually? I said it. Yours is little ending, but I don't know if it's due to the VM or CPU.
It might be some weird thing to do with VM. Yeah.
Might be worth checking. Googling.
I'll
Google it whilst
do it in chat,
yeah.
Yeah, and then the next thing, is it a container? So that goes back to the Docker thing that I mentioned. I mean, I think there's Kubernetes and stuff. That'll get flagged. Or if you are a Docker host and you're running containers, it'll flag that as well. So Docker's always an interesting vector. Really useful tool for sysadmins that know how to use it. But if it's misconfigured, you can cripple your entire system. and it'll list off any devices, unmounted file systems. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go on, Matt.
I was about to say, now we're moving on to sort of like some of the more fun stuff. So if we keep scrolling down, we get a list of all of the what they consider useful system and useful software. So here we get a lot of Nmap, because if you need to install Nmap, that's great because it allows you to scan other machines on the network. Because most of the time, if you are doing a big pen test, you have access to a single low-level machine in someone's cubicle, for instance, and you are trying to mitigate and elevate yourself all the way up the food chain to get to a big server. So if we have Nmap, we can start looking for ways around the system. Is there something running RDP, like the remote desktop protocol for Windows? Can we go and have a look at that and start looking around these kinds of systems? But yeah, keep scrolling down. We've got a bunch of
Sorry, give me a sec.
compilers. Yeah, you
Definitely
work.
didn't go grab a drink.
Oh, for shame, sir. For
Yeah.
shame.
Yeah, it's mentioned compilers. This system has a lot because I install all sorts of stuff. But yeah, usually you'll probably see you'll maybe see Python and like G++ and that's, but you rarely see stuff like Go or Ruby's not listed in here, but pretty sure I have that on my system. But yeah.
But yeah, there's a lot of information that you can get out of your LinPEAS script. So if we just keep scrolling down until we find something big, red, shiny, and cool, because
there's the
it's
odd
just
bit. Yeah, there's the odd bit in this process list, but it's not great stuff to
most
talk
of the time,
about. Yeah.
exploiting like lists of programs and stuff like that, like is going to be a much harder CTF than I will ever want to do, but it's definitely possible. Most of the time it comes with experience, XDN. So again, like when I'm looking at them, it doesn't mark all of the process environment variables as red or the compilers as red. But if I know that the system's got Python on it, I turn into a happy man. It allows you to do a lot of other cool stuff if you've got these kinds of things installed.
Python's surprisingly powerful. You can, if you need to craft some weird, you need to send 3800 A's or something to a program to crash it, to do some weird priv-esque. Python, you can just do like one short command, and that's it. And can I do this live is the question.
Can he remember the files?
Yeah, there you go. So yeah, in Python, if you need to send a ton of one character, it's super easy. You just take the character, times it by 100, and print it. There you go. There's 100 A's.
And all of a sudden, you can start working this into not even complete buffer overflows, but you can fill up log files so that if you were trying not to be detected, you can overload with the information and stuff like that.
Yeah, so if you can't delete the log file, if you just fill it and it's designed to rotate and delete old logs, if you keep filling it and keep filling it, eventually those old logs with your stuff will disappear and it'll just be full of garbage data, which isn't useful to a sysadmin. So
no. We can keep going down though. Just looking at the chat. You can go line by line, but I wouldn't recommend going line by line in a TAC A because there is so much more information in the version that we're running compared to a standard version of just running the LinPEAS script.
How can crashing system be used? Crashing system.
Oh, I think he's on about, if you're crashing like certain processes and stuff. So in that case, if you send weird input to them, it might cause background processes to crash. And if, for instance, that background process when it starts up, it calls some certain binary as root, and you can modify that other binary, you crash the process, it then triggers that, it to restart
binary to run
and recall and run the binary, and you can elevate.
So the easiest way to describe how you would do that is sort of like put in a thing saying if you have access to the user Ryan, for instance, you modify that binary and say, give Ryan sudo access in that binary for arbitrary sakes. Yes, it probably won't work, but for an instance, if you crash the program out, it calls back the thing, it reads the first line is, make Ryan an admin. Okay, then we've got root technically. So we've got sudo access.
So this is an interesting thing to actually flagged. It'll check it. It'll check, if certain processes are running and whether you can dump creds from its memory. So if you already have root on the system, but you're trying to, get into a certain account for whatever reason you can't get into, then you can dump the memory of a process and possibly get passwords out of that. So in this case, LightDM, which is the desktop manager that Kali and Ubuntu and things like that use. It's obvious it'll have my password somewhere sat in its memory from when I logged on.
Which, as you can imagine, probably isn't the best thing for to be left lying around.
Yeah.
So
I think it clears it after a bit, but I don't know. This was run about like 30 seconds after I logged in, so.
Yep. So we can keep scrolling down. There's a bunch of databases, a bunch of cron jobs.
I'm skipping over cron jobs.
Bunch of services that we don't need.
Put it simply, cron job is a task that's automatically run by the system at time intervals.
It's most commonly used for stuff like backups or automatic updates. So once a week, you call an update server and it says, I'll just update everything once a week, or every day post your critical data to this other server. And sometimes they can have plain text credentials in them, but it's rare.
Aside in addition to the credential thing, cron jobs can actually execute programs certain users, and usually these are root. And maybe you can find a cron job and replace that particular process that is trying to run, and it will still run it as root because it won't know that it's modified, just knows the path to it and execute it straight away. So you can do it, make it do whatever you want, but the main downside is that you'll have to wait however long that cron job has the timer, a day, a month, a year, maybe.
Yeah. So it's an unreliable way of getting it, but if you've got no other way, then
just skimming over services. You might know from your initial Nmap scan of a system, it's running a web server on this port, and that's all you can see, an SSH maybe or whatever. But if you scroll down services, you can see, it's got stuff like MySQL installed in this case. I think there's a VPN client. It's got SMB in there, so you can, do Windows network file transfer. Other things that you'll notice, like VirtualBox guest utils if you're in a VM. And then we go on to seeing the system path, which, back to what I said about earlier, you might be able to use that to get cron or some other process to call a binary that it's not meant to call. More service file stuff,
which we're going to skip over because I just realised we're running out of
time. We've done like a quarter of the bloody everything.
Aye.
System timers.
Most of the time you can't do a lot with them. There might be, again, the odd one thing. Config files, again, if you can change the config files for different groups or different users. A bunch of system information about what it's running, where it's putting data to.
Network information that could flag the odd thing. As you can see, I've got a couple of hack the box entries in my hosts file. It'll list that, and it'll list other networks it knows, it can access if there's any weird route in setup. You'll be able to see all those. You can see the network interfaces, a bit more network stuff, what IPs and stuff it knows about, the active ports that are listening. If it can access the internet in this case over certain ports, because firewalls might block that. But if if this flag's going, you can copy over port 80, then you can run a web server somewhere on the internet and still access it from this box. And then we get to user information, which goes over what was flagged right at the top. It's got sudo, so in this case, we have access to everything. It's also got this video group, which I don't actually know what that's for. You'd have to look up. There's plenty of guides explaining like a bunch of these standard groups. You'll check for GPG keys or PGP keys.
Which are your encryption algorithm that if, for instance, you've got a credential dump or something like that, it's most likely going to be encrypted using PGP or PG, or encrypted emails as well are going to be most of the time run with them.
Yeah, sudo TACL. This is something I know the non-TAC-A version doesn't do, because it's caught me out way too many times. Effectively, that'll list any sudo perms. So if you're not in the sudo group, but you have access to, I don't know, sudo nano, for instance, because you can set the sudo file up so you can only run sudo for certain binaries or whatever. This will list that section there, but you can obviously just run sudo TACL separately and it'll list off what those are for your user. It'll checking sudo tokens. I presume this is the has authenticated with sudo or something, the file that it can check. I can't remember what the file's called exactly, but effectively when someone runs sudo and then whatever command it, when you ask you to type your password in, it then creates a temporary file. And if that's there, you might be able to, if you can somehow access that user or run a command as that user, you don't need to know their passwords or run something like sudo as them.
So for those sudo vulnerabilities, is there a certain website that they can go to find out for, let's say, Nano or that? Is there a website that they can go to find it?
Yes, there is.
I think it's GTFO bin,
yeah,
but I
GTFO
can't remember.
bins. Let me copy this from my host system real quick.
I just couldn't remember the name of it. I knew where it was. There we go. Yeah. So this has a lot of sort of, if you have sudo for a particular file type or a particular program, you can get shells or those kinds of interesting things, and it will sort of list them for you. And this is probably the biggest way that you're going to be getting privilege escalation in some machines. So, for example,
there's some decent shells, like Ash. There you go, random shell. You click it, and it goes. If it's got the set, the SUID bit set, you can run this command, and then run Ash, and effectively you can elevate to root
a pseudo privileged shell. Yeah. Which is incredibly, incredibly useful. But there is so much more to cover in this. So if you do want to know more about it and some of the WinPEAS stuff, we are going to be in Discord. So you can come chat to us about all of the stuff that we are going to be looking at, chatting about recent cybersecurity news and stuff like that as well. But I hope we didn't blow your brains too much. And we are trying this new style. So if you do have any sort of like feedback for it, please let us know. And we'll do our best to improve it for next time. So thank you very much.
One note before we go, sorry. I just found this. It checks for SUID bits, so you'd be able to put these binaries and stuff into the GTFO bin site, and I was just flicking down this.
Yep. It's related to the last thing that we just covered, so yeah, it's fine. But as I say, thank you very much for watching, and we will be over in Discord if you need us or want to talk to us about anything.